The remake of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening is, at the moment, the most recent main release in the Legend of Zelda series and has already been covered on Video Games for Fun, alongside its original release on the Game Boy. So, today, on February 21st, is the anniversary of the game where it all began. The first game, simply titled The Legend of Zelda, released on the Famicom or NES in 1986 and 1987. Produced and directed by Shigeru Miyamoto, who was inspired by the surprise explorations through the fields, woods and caves of Kyoto, the game was to be a non-linear game in contrast to Super Mario Bros. The title princess of the series was named after the wife of novelist F. Scott Fitzgerald, while the playable hero is named Link, for the purpose of a blank slate as players take on the adventure themselves. But should they do so even today? Is the game even a good start to what is generally considered one of Nintendo's biggest franchises? Well, let's rediscover this game on the NES Mini even, and find out. When you boot up the game, a succinct summary of what has happened prior to gameplay is shown after the title screen. It is a little more detailed in the manual. Pay attention to the manual, by the way. It is important for how to progress through the game and will be mentioned in this review. The game takes place in Hyrule, where the legendary golden triangles that make up the Triforce are being sought after by the evil Prince of Darkness, Ganon. After the power triangle of the Triforce is taken, Princess Zelda breaks the wisdom triangle into multiple fragments and hides them throughout the land. She is kidnapped by Ganon's minions and tells her maid Impa to find a hero. Impa almost dies until Link shows up with some surely good swordsmanship. And that's where you, the player, come in, as you control Link on his quest to find all the fragments of the Triforce of Wisdom, save Zelda, and stop Ganon. The plot is very simple, which is understandable for a game of its time. This means that the game is purely about the gameplay and exploring this big world. That is pretty much it, though there are the production values. The graphics are not necessarily any better than those of, say, Super Mario Bros. The color scheme is decent, and the characters and items look really nice and have enough clarity so you know what something is and how to interact with it. The slowdown when there are too many enemies or objects on screen, though, is jarring. The soundtrack is limited, yet still consists of some of the most memorable 8-bit music in gaming history. The general melody that is heard in the intro and Otherworld, the main Zelda theme, is undeniably iconic. It does, however, get repetitive the more you explore the overworld. The same can be said for the dungeon music. Plus the high-pitched chiptune notes can negatively affect the ears. Oh, and don't forget the "you're low on health" sound. Outside of the flaws, the production values are fine and are fairly easy to overlook in terms of how old they are. Is it possible to overlook the retro gameplay in a similar way? Well, that can depend more so on manuals and guides, and how they instruct the player on the open-ended gameplay. Well, first of all, let's look at the moment you take control of Link. You have 3 paths and a cave to choose to go in. This is what exemplifies the freedom in the game. You don't have to go right like you generally do in Super Mario Bros. Of course, as everyone surely knows, you have to go into the cave and see the memorable line, "It's dangerous to go alone, take this," before taking the sword. Then you can choose from one of the 3 paths, fight enemies with the sword, and just explore this, for the time, big open world. As mentioned in the story, you're looking for the Triforce fragments and the whereabouts of Zelda and Ganon. But where do you go? Well, it is actually somewhat challenging to accomplish this task. You are not told where to go at all, save for some really cryptic hints by individuals who usually stay in caves, sometimes with items to give you. Much of the items to use mostly became a staple of the Legend of Zelda series, including the sword, shield, heart containers, bombs, boomerang, and so on. There are some unique items including a raft, stepladder, and even food. These are actually mandatory to progressing, and herein lies a big problem. While it is nice to have the freedom to explore, much of the secrets and whereabouts of items are nigh on impossible to find without a guide or map. Things that were mostly surely a given for those who looked at Nintendo Power back when this game was released. Of course, you can look at the internet now. Yay! How are you supposed to know you could burn that bush or tree? or that rock face could be blown up with a bomb. Though there are some hints, and the difficulty of certain overworld enemies almost gives off the vibe of how close you are to a late game dungeon, it feels too obscure, regardless of a potential playground chatter of exchanging secrets and hints with other players, or just trying to interact with every tiny thing. Similar criticisms can also be leveled at the combat and dungeons, though this is comparable to the later entries in the Legend of Zelda series. Here, Link can only move and swing his sword and its beams in 4 directions. This can sometimes make combat frustrating. And of course, there is the most important element to progression: the dungeons, of which there are several, each containing a Triforce fragment at the end. Inspired by the halls and doors of Shigeru Miyamoto's family home, these dungeons are usually challenging mazes, with less open-ended exploration than in the overworld, which is refreshing. Finding the dungeons and completing them is actually relatively easy early on in the game, but the later ones? The aforementioned items that are mandatory to progressing, which can be hard to find. Walls that you have to blow up with bombs, which you may not always be able to tell. Rooms of enemies you have to clear, and some of the enemies that exist only in dungeons are extremely hard, including the magic-wielding Wizrobes and the knight-like Dark Nuts that can only be hurt from behind or on the side. Easier said than done, since they do not stop moving and are even aided by projectiles that never stop firing at Link. In front of the door to each respective Triforce fragment lies a big boss. They are mostly easy to defeat, though they can be annoying sometimes. Even with these problems, the main aspect of this game to really focus on is the freedom. There are of course the aforementioned multiple pathways in the overworld, and the game not telling you where to find items and dungeons. But there is a little more to it than that. For example, there are upgrades to find in the game even before you can enter the first dungeon that help increase or decrease the damage you give to or take from enemies. And these are not cheap. It's best to find bunches of rupees hidden around. It is even possible to hold on to at least one dungeon door key if you don't explore the dungeon fully, which can be used in another dungeon. Even dungeons can be completed out of order. You can go to dungeon 8 very early on in the game, but then again, you'll find that dungeon very tough if you haven't explored or completed other dungeons properly. This makes for a little replay value, combined with the second quest. The second quest, unlocked after completing the game for the first time or typing in Zelda at the file selection screen, features changed locations of most items and dungeons, and different dungeon layouts and enemies. It is harder. While there are certainly problems with the game that are more to do with age or having to look at a guide or especially the manual for understanding so much as a hint about Dodongos and smoke, it is impossible to ignore how influential, important, and even revolutionary this game is. If it weren't for this game, we wouldn't have the later action-adventure or even action RPG games. There wouldn't be open-world playgrounds, like in the GTA or Elder Scrolls games. More importantly, we wouldn't have the Legend of Zelda series, with some small or big improvements in subsequent entries, such as cracks in walls in A Link to the Past, or even the recent Breath of the Wild, not holding your hand so much and letting you explore, a callback to the first game that started it all, complete with Link, Princess Zelda, Ganon, Impa, Hyrule, and the Triforce. Oh, and don't forget the little chimes and melodies. If you feel like discovering or rediscovering the beginning of the Legend of Zelda series, you may find it to be quite fun.